In today's video, we're discussing a trade rumor between the Montreal Canadiens and the Philadelphia Flyers that some believe might be discussed in the summertime. Plus, we're also looking at the goaltender carousel for the upcoming NHL offseason. We're looking at an Athletic article by Pierre LeBrun speculating on some goaltender movement. Plus, we have confirmation on the Bruins opponent for the Winter Classic. Plus, we have several prospect signings as well. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and some trade rumors to take a look at here today. First up, let's get started with the news on the Winter Classic. Now, we of course got word already from the NHL that the Boston Bruins would be hosting the next Winter Classic. It would be held at Fenway Park. We just didn't know who the Bruins were going to be playing, and that's been confirmed today by ESPN, confirming that the Pittsburgh Penguins will indeed be their opponent. Now, this shouldn't come as a huge surprise. The Pittsburgh Penguins always get to play in these games, which I understand why, but I'm not really a big fan of. It feels like wash, rinse, repeat to me. I understand that certain markets are going to be more favorable than others to get these games because of a larger fan base and the more likelihood to buy tickets. And I get it. It's all about money. It's business. I understand. But when it comes to the NHL, in my opinion, marketing a lot of different NHL young talent and upcoming elite players that are being developed in this league, I really think we need to get more teams in some of these unique key games that really get the spotlight shone on them. You know, like you got lots of elite talent around the NHL between McDavid, Draisaitl, Matthews, Marner, McKinnon, all kinds of talent. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. You got all kinds of young talent as well. You know, look at the Anaheim Ducks when Trevor Zegras and the Troy Terry. I could go on here for hours, but all this young talent and all the elite level players that don't seem to get marketed by this league. I mean, to me, I understand Crosby, Bergeron, Marchand, Ovechkin, like they're still very marketable players, have been around a long time, still very big part of the league. And I'm not suggesting the league stop marketing those guys, but I would like to see more players be involved in this and more teams to kind of spread the love around. And in my opinion, I mean, like I said, I no doubt the Bruins-Penguins matchup will certainly be a game that will probably sell out no problem, but I'm not really sure it would matter too much who the Bruins opponent would be in this case. Bruins have a huge fan base. I have no doubt they would pack Fenway regardless of who they were playing, just because of the love for hockey and the love for the Bruins in that area. So we'll see, but that is confirmed for that Winter Classic. Hopefully at some point we do get some more teams involved in some of these big outdoor events to get the spotlight shined on it, to get some more players, more national attention, if you will. We do have a fine to discuss here in NHL. Of course, we had a bit of a situation last night between the Wild and Oilers with Evander Kane and Ryan Hartman. As they were going off the ice, Ryan Hartman decided to give Evander Kane the middle finger. So obviously giving him a proverbial FU, and he's actually been fined for that. So I'm actually a little surprised. I mean, they called it unsportsmanlike conduct. Based on the CBA, the max they can fine is $4,250. There's actually fans out there trying to raise money and send money to Hartman for covering this fine, even though he obviously makes enough money that he doesn't really need it. But just the fact that it goes to show you how people feel about Evander Kane and the fact that they, they just want to help him because they enjoyed what happened. It's kind of funny in a way. At the same time, I'm a little confused. I mean, I understand that it's, not a great gesture, clearly, but you hear all kinds of players cursing, swearing, chirping at each other on the ice all the time, and you don't see fines being handed out for it. And as much as the middle finger by some might be considered an obscene gesture, it's really not nearly as bad as some things that can be said or done. And really, it's no different than actually saying F you instead of giving the gesture for it. And you never see anything done for that. So I find that confusing. I don't know. Anyways, Hartman's been fined. And looks like if he's willing to accept, fans want to help him pay the cost because it was Evander Kane on the receiving end of it. Now, some more prospects have signed contracts here today. The Red Wings have signed goaltender Marcus Hellberg. Of course, he's been playing in the KHL for the past 5 years, had a previous NHL run with the New York Rangers. Certainly, extra depth for the Red Wings. Clearly, they have Thomas Greiss. We also have Alex Nedeljkovic. I'm not really sure if they'll be coming back with the same goaltending tandem. It's quite possible Greiss may not return. Hellberg might be able to work with Nedeljkovic next year. Just add some more depth and also adds it takes pressure, I guess, off some of the younger goalies having to move to the NHL level too. I'm not sure what Hellberg will look like when he comes over, but certainly, it's a 1-year deal, low risk, somebody who's they'd be familiar with from previous experience. So we'll see what happens and see if he can make his NHL return next year. Predators have signed defensive prospect Adam Wilsby, who's been playing in the SHL for the past 2 years. So his season's over, contract signed. He was a 2020 draft choice, taken 101st overall, and he will join the Predators in North America next season. And of course, we saw probably the biggest signing of the day was the Avalanche signing the top college unrestricted free agent, and that's Ben Meyers, who has been getting the most attention by NHL clubs amongst the players that are UFA coming out of college. The former University of Minnesota captain was named Big Ten Player of the Year. He gets a 2-year entry-level contract from Colorado, and they are going to let him burn a year and start that contract immediately. Now, the only thing is because he signed so late, he will not be eligible for the playoffs. So you might be wondering why that is. You've probably seen other prospects sign contracts when their college season was done and join their teams and be eligible for the playoffs. But the big factor here is that he was an unrestricted free agent. He was not drafted by them. That does make a difference for their eligibility. So in Meyers' case, he'll be able to play any remaining regular season games, but that's all. Either way, gives him a good introduction to the league. I'm not sure how quickly they'll get him in there or how many. Of course, he hails from Minnesota as well. Not only did he play at the University of Minnesota, that's his home state. So certainly signing with one of the Wild's big rivals is interesting. The Wild, amongst many other teams, were very much involved in having interest in this player. So we'll see. I would think that the Avalanche are certainly, like many teams, bound to have some salary cap complications next year. And if he turns out to be a pretty good pro, could prove to be a player who can fit into the next year's roster at a cheaper level and kind of help level things out, as they probably will need to shuffle around like many teams will, based on, not having a lot of space to work with. So we'll see how things go for Ben Meyers in the Colorado Avalanche organization. Now, another young player who's already under contract, but certainly been, had an odd start to his career, is Rangers' former first-round pick Vitaly Kravtsov, who we know this season went back to Russia after not making the NHL roster at a training camp. He was not pleased about being sent down to the minors and opted to want to go back in Russia instead. He's been there for quite some time. There's been all kinds of talk about a trade happening. I know there was at one point speculation that he and his agent Dan Milstein had requested the Rangers to trade him. Of course, that's yet to happen. I wouldn't rule out the fact that it could, but for right now, his season in Russia has come to a close. And I know there was also speculation that the Rangers, very well, since they didn't trade him, if he could come back to North America and play well, but up his value while at the same time helping the team. So it could be a win-win for both sides, but that doesn't look like it's going to happen. Right now, his season's over. Apparently, the plan is for him to remain in Russia and start early offseason training, and then to join the Rangers in New York sometime early in the summer to kind of get a head start on training camp and getting ready. He'll probably work with the team's, training staff, etc., to kind of get ready. That's assuming a trade doesn't happen. Once the offseason's in full swing, I wouldn't completely rule that out, but it looks like right now that's not a given, that they very well might be trying to kind of work out that relationship and see where things go for next season. Now, we also saw some big milestones last night as well. We had 14 games on the NHL schedule. It was a very busy night. It was certainly difficult to keep up with all the games at one time, channel surfing back and forth all the time. But we saw Chris Kreider get goal number 50, which is big for him. He hadn't even hit 30 before, so to go all the way to 50 this year is absolutely insane. We saw Johnny Gaudreau pass the 100-point total. He's at 101 now, so that's a career high for him in a contract year. So that's certainly huge. And of course, we saw a couple of other firsts last night with Matty Beniers and Bobby Brink, amongst a few other players making their NHL debuts and getting their first points. So Beniers and Brink both recorded assists in their games. Of course, Owen Power played against the Maple Leafs in his hometown and had a solid game, in my opinion. Played, I think it was 17 or 18 minutes, looked really good. And Buffalo beat Toronto, which seems to be somewhat of a regular occurrence this year for some odd reason. I'm not sure what it is, but the Sabres seem to be the Leafs' kryptonite. But anyway, there's lots of firsts, lots of milestones taking place last night. We now have a few more players in the 50-goal club. Of course, Ovechkin is the next one to likely have a shot at that. A few other players too, like McDavid, Kyle Connor, and a few others are kind of getting into that range of, high 30s, late, early 40s, that they have a shot at 50, but it's an outside shot. I don't know how many more we'll actually see get that magic number besides Matthews and, of course, Draisaitl. And, of course, now we have Kreider and Ovechkin likely heading there as well. So certainly going to be a very interesting season. Nice to see some players over 50 goals for a change, which is not something we've seen much of here in recent years. Now let's get on to the rumor section of today's video. As I mentioned, we have a pretty substantial trade rumor that could take place this offseason. Now it may or may not happen, of course, but it was believed to be discussed before the trade deadline. Some people think that it's still a possibility, and others are saying that with other events that have taken place that it's less likely now. But here's what was being discussed. This comes from Eric Engels. Now this information is actually from Eric Engels of Sportsnet about a week ago. I just never had a chance to read the article until today, but essentially it goes over the fact that Jeff Petrie, as we know, had requested a trade out of Montreal. They've been very upfront and forward and open about this. Kent Hughes has been on record saying that he would do what he could to try to accommodate a trade for Petrie. Of course, Petrie and his wife are expecting their another child, plus they already have 3 young ones in the U.S. with all the restrictions. It's been a really tough year, and it was basically believed that he would prefer to play in the U.S. and wouldn't have to deal with a lot of the border stuff and COVID restrictions and just make life a little bit simpler at home for him, and they were going to do their best. And of course, at the same time, he was having a terrible start to the season. Now, since Marty St. Louis taken over, his game has picked up, then he got hurt, and it's just been, all around the place here. But Petrie certainly looked a little bit more like himself after the coaching change. That's certainly fair to say. It's believed, though, that there was conversations about maybe sending him to the Philadelphia Flyers in exchange for James Van Riemsdyk. Now, it wasn't exactly a one-for-one trade. I don't want anybody leaving comments saying, oh, that's one-for-one, that'll never happen. That's not what we're saying. They would be the 2 main pieces involved, but there could be other pieces involved. It's believed that the Montreal Canadiens would likely also receive a prospect, which I'm guessing could be a player like a Morgan Frost, maybe. I mean, Frost has been in their system for some time. To me, had a lot of potential in juniors, had some decent showings at the AHL, but it just, for some reason in Philly, have never gotten that full NHL, down pat, become a regular kind of player. I don't know what happened to him, but he looked really good before. Maybe he'd be a player getting benefit from a fresh start and a new coach like Marty St. Louis. It's just a thought on my part. But still, at the same time, they're also saying that Montreal would likely retain a little bit of salary on Petrie to help the Flyers out. And then, of course, the difference here is that Petrie has more term than Van Riemsdyk, but Van Riemsdyk makes a little bit more money. So it would be a little bit of a hit to the cap for the Habs if they have to retain some of Petrie. I don't think it would be a whole lot, but if they retain even like $1 million or something like that so that it knocks it down closer to 5 for the Flyers, that would be more reasonable. Maybe it's a little bit more. I'm not sure exactly what they were looking for, but of course JVR is making $7 million, but only 1 more year. So it's a situation where they could get JVR in this trade and then likely trade him at the deadline, assuming Montreal is not a playoff team next year because they're expected to be rebuilding. I don't know that if they're going to be a whole lot better than this year. It's really difficult to say at this point. We don't know the full offseason and what's all going to happen. They could be better, but are will they be better enough for playoffs? It's going to be a tough mountain to climb. There's no doubt about it. So realistically, assuming they're not in the playoffs, JVR could be dealt and they could get maybe another asset or 2 in return, depending on how he goes. I mean, even though JVR is not the player he used to be, he's not, quick really at all. Like speed is not his game. He still has a really good net front presence, could be good in the power play, and he's still going to score 20 plus goals this year. So, even if a team picked him up at the deadline strictly for that purpose, put him on the power play, in the playoffs, like the guy's good and he's really good in tight. That's been his specialty his whole career. So to me, like that, it does make sense. They can move Petrie, they get JVR, who they can then use for 1 season and flip them at the deadline, and they get something else as well, some kind of a young prospect or draft pick to help with, obviously the future. So to me, the trade does make a lot of sense on the Montreal side. Now, on the Philly side, I think a lot of this was kind of with the assumption that Rasmus Ristolainen might not be back. But here's the other part of the Philly blue line is that we don't know what other moves they're going to make. Ristolainen obviously signs. We know he'll stay. They have Ryan Ellis. Is he going to be able to return and play? We assume so, that his health will be good enough next year. He's under contract for quite a while, so there's that. But will Provorov, Sanheim, and others possibly be moved? Like, I don't know that they're done retooling that blue line in Philadelphia. So, it's not necessarily a for sure given that Petrie wouldn't go there. But you would think that the right side, if you have Ellis, Ristolainen, and Petrie, that, none of those guys are really typically third pair defensemen, so I don't know how that would go. So we'll see how things go in Philadelphia. I do think the Ristolainen signing does make the deal a little bit less likely, but you can't completely rule it out at this point either. As I mentioned as well, I want to take a look at an article from Pierre LeBrun in The Athletic today talking about a goaltender carousel that we might see this offseason. A lot of this could certainly be started by the main 4 UFA goalies that are considered starting goaltenders that could all possibly be on the move for a variety of reasons, and they may not sign with their existing clubs, and it could set off a carousel of a lot of movement in that position, which we've seen before in recent years. Of course, those 4 goaltenders we're talking about here includes Darcy Kuemper in Colorado. It includes Marc-Andre Fleury in Minnesota. It certainly includes Jack Campbell in Toronto. Of course, Ville Husso in St. Louis. Now, the article goes on to say that Pierre LeBrun believes that Bill Guerin would like to keep Fleury beyond the current season, although that will be a challenge based on his contract. They still have Cam Talbot for another year, and they obviously have a very tight cap situation coming up with the Parise and Suter buyouts really kicking in high gear for the next few years. So to keep him will be a challenge, but there's certainly interest, and we can't rule it out at this point. When it comes to Darcy Kuemper, I think a lot of it's going to depend on the playoffs, but even then, even if he goes on to help the Avalanche win a Stanley Cup, for example, I'm not entirely convinced that he goes back. I think the Avalanche would like to avoid having a mega long-term contract with big money on a goaltender, and if he goes on to win a cup, that's what he's going to be able to command on the open market, and I'm not sure that's something Joe Sakic wants. So we'll see about that. I mean, they do have Pavel Francouz already extended, which is certainly curious, and I don't know how they're going to go about things in the Avalanche organization. I think the Maple Leafs at this point would have every indication that they would like to sign Jack Campbell, but I think the playoffs, again, will be a big help here in determining what they do. Clearly, Jack Campbell has been a great goalie at times, but he's also had his struggles with his health, and he's had his struggles with his play. If he goes on to help the Leafs have a real solid playoff run, obviously if they win a cup, that's completely different. I think he gets back there for sure, but even if they don't win a cup and they go deep, but they finally get over the playoff hump and have some success, I think the Leafs will do everything they can to sign him, but it's only going to push his value up higher, and it's going to make it more challenging. But I fully suspect that there's a good chance that he does return, unless his playoffs, for example, are really terrible and they decide to go in another direction, which could surprise everybody. But at this point, we don't think like that's going to happen, and we expect Campbell to return. When it comes to Ville Husso, Pierre LeBrun goes on to say that he believes that he's probably priced himself out of St. Louis, but that he's probably going to end up having to go elsewhere if he really wants to be a starter, which kind of surprises me a bit because he does say that the Blues still heavily believe in Jordan Binnington. He's signed for 5 more years at $6 million, which I understand will be a tough contract to move, but you would think maybe they would try in an effort to keep Husso because he's clearly been a better goaltender this year, and to lose him for nothing after all those years of development would really hurt the organization, in my opinion. So we'll see where that goes, but he's going to be a very interesting player to watch here as well. So those 4 goalies, if they all decide to move on or for whatever reason don't sign with their teams, it's going to certainly have a big effect because those teams are going to be looking to the market for other options. So, of course, on other tradable goaltenders, you have to look at the possibility of Carey Price, which Pierre LeBrun talks about here again. Is Carey Price going to play games this year? Is it going to mean that he wants to come back next year or not? How do the Habs feel about it? Can they retain a bunch of his money and move him? It's not going to be any easy task. As we've talked about before, Carey Price, I wouldn't rule out a trade, but it would be very, very complicated and expensive for Montreal to do. But we'll see how the Habs' new regime feels about that, as well as the goaltender himself, who, of course, has all the say because of his full no-move clause, but certainly his future question things. LeBrun goes on to mention some other goalies that he expects will generate trade interest, goalies that already have before, like Alex Georgiev with the Rangers, who we know has expressed interest to get more opportunity elsewhere. Of course, we're looking at a guy like Peter Mrazek in Toronto. We know the Leafs are going to want to move Mrazek. Matt Murray in Ottawa, he believes that they really need to do everything they can to move on from that contract, which will be tough to do. We could see some buyouts here as well, making some of these guys UFAs. That would certainly change things a little bit in the market as well. And then they're not the only ones out there that could be, possibly on the move. That's just the beginning here of goaltenders that are, either current starters or recent starters to kind of shake the market up here a little bit. And there's a bunch of other UFA goalies too that are kind of like a level down. You're looking at like your Korpisalo and Holtby and guys like that very well could be on the move and certainly shake things up. Mikko Koskinen's another one out of Edmonton. So we will see that all kinds of teams are going to be looking for goaltender changes, at least it's quite possible in some capacity, whether it be their starting role or the backup role. And a lot of these guys could find themselves on the move. But obviously, the UFA guys are the big names. But when it comes to trades, you're looking at Price, Georgiev, Mrazek, Murray. Like, are we going to see some substantial goalie trades this year? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.